Welcome to another Sunday Extra podcast with Hope Church. My name is Brian Cropp. I'm one of the associate pastors. And over the last several weeks, we as a church have been in a series called God's Grand Story Volume 1. That Volume 1 would be the Old Testament. We've been looking at the major timeline that is in the Old Testament, some of the major figures, events, themes that are contained within the Old Testament, so that, as you're reading the Old Testament for yourself, the Old Testament can be rather intimidating and daunting, and we want to take that out, but also encourage you to see how God is consistent throughout the entire Bible, that the entire Bible is one whole story, and highlight how Jesus is the central figure throughout the whole Bible. He's not just when he shows up in the New Testament, that's the first time he shows up. And we've been highlighting how the image or the prediction or just the figures in the Old Testament point to Jesus, whether that's through prophecy and pointing to him into the future, or that there are people who prefigure him in some way or another. So we hope that this series is an encouragement to you. I am joined by our lead pastor, Matt Sturdevant. This past Sunday, we got the Israelites into the Promised Land.
They made it.
They made it. I think, the week before, they had an opportunity in the book of Numbers to maybe like less than 2 weeks to get from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land. They sent spies in. The spies said, the land is awesome, but we can't move in. The people are frightening. And so they failed this test of God saying, move in. A lot of the Old Testament could have been a lot shorter.
They could have.
If they had just moved in. But this is sort of chance number 2 to move in, and what God does after the ministry that Moses had and his leadership. Before we started filming, you were talking about this principle of, we see it in this part of the Old Testament, but that it also plays out into our life, of that there is, God leads us to a spot and he teaches us things, and then he's going to test those things, and then what comes out of it. Can you go a little bit further into what all that's about, how that shows up in the Old Testament, how that shows up in our lives as well?
Yeah. So this is one of the major teaching points that we kind of spend a few minutes on in the Walk Through the Bible events, but we just didn't have time to get into it at all here on Sunday morning. And so basically, you take a look at the way that God and his people moved through Genesis through Joshua, and you can see a parallel in our own individual lives.
Mm-hmm.
So, the book of Genesis, it ends with God's people in Egypt, and then they are enslaved in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
In Exodus, then through the work of Moses, God's people are redeemed and they are freed. And then you get to Leviticus, which everyone's favorite book. But Leviticus is about teaching. It's about teaching people how to worship God. It's a book specifically written to the Levites about how to lead people in the worship of God. But you could think of it as it's a book about teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you mentioned, you get to Numbers, and a test occurs. And the test is, are you going to go in the Promised Land or not? And they fail the test. So really, it should have taken them about 11 days to get from Sinai to the Promised Land, but that 11-day journey turns into 40 years of wandering in the desert because they would not go forward and do what God said. And so then they get an opportunity to relearn. So in Deuteronomy, which means second law,
Mm-hmm.
It is not a new second law, but it is a reteaching of the law. And then they get to have another test. And this time the test is, are they going to go into the Promised Land under Joshua? And of course, they pass that test. So I think the parallel for us is, Genesis is a book of beginnings. So we all begin this world. When we're born, we are born enslaved to sin. We're
Mm-hmm.
born as sinners. And then because of what Jesus has done, we we can be redeemed. He's already done what needs to happen more than 2,000 years ago, and we can choose to put our hope and our trust and our faith in him, and then we can be saved. So we're enslaved, and then we're saved, and then basically, from the moment you become a follower of Jesus, you begin the rest of your life learning, growing, being taught, learning what are God's ways, how do I apply them to my life. And after we're taught something, then naturally we get tested. And we all experience this in school, right? We don't just learn things for fun. Usually, what's the big question? Is this going to be on the test? Well, life. We talked about life being the training ground.
Mm-hmm.
So we can expect to be tested on the things that we learn in life. And sometimes we pass those tests. We pass them with flying colors. Other times we don't do so good. So guess what? We have to be re-taught. One of the things we talk about on Sunday morning, the things that people are talking about in their groups, the things that people are reading in their own personal quiet time, like that's a form of learning, a form of being taught. So it's natural to expect some type of a test to come later. Kind of a classic example of this. Let's just say we're doing a message on patience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right after you finish the message on patience, people were leaving the parking lot, and guess what? You get a flat tire, you get behind the slowest person in town, and you don't have an opportunity to be patient. So
Right.
the test comes. So we see that this pattern in the first part of the Old Testament. We see that in our lives. In fact, going back to the time period of the Judges again, that was actually them failing over and over again on sort of a national scale.
Right.
They had this 5-step cycle that they repeated 7 different times. Well, they would learn, and they would be tested, and then they would fail. They would go right back. God delivered them. It's like you walk in his ways and you do right, and then they get delivered, and all of a sudden they go right back to ignoring God and getting back into sin again. So that this principle of being enslaved, being redeemed, being taught, being tested,
Mm-hmm.
that occurs over and over again, and just in life.
And I would like to say that only happens once. But I was talking with your wife, Jessica, this is years ago now, where if people don't know, she used to work on staff, and she was my boss for a while. And there was probably something I kept thinking I was failing in something that I should have down. I don't know if it was skill related or character related or relationships, or I can't remember what it was now. And what she said really stuck with me of, God leads you to a spot and he tests you, and maybe you fail, and maybe eventually you choose to follow him and you grow out of that. Well, you're going to hit that again, but at a different layer of complexity. You think you come back around to that same issue. I could imagine, there's a level of selflessness that you need to grow in as a follower of Jesus, and you think, okay, well, I'm selfless. I've really grown in that, and then you get married. And then you discover, oh no, there's a whole bunch of selfishness that I still have. Well, life just got more complicated. And so God retests you on that issue of selflessness versus selfishness at a new layer of complexity. And you have new tests and new failings and new learnings. You're like, okay, I got this. I now know how to do this. And then you get kids. Oh, and so
then you find out how really selfish you are.
Selfish you are.
And how much you like sleep.
Yeah. So to us, it feels like I should be past this. But what God does is he brings up a new layer of complexity to continue to grow and to stretch you. So, there's, like you said, there's this lifelong learning and trusting God at different layers.
Yeah, I think, particularly if someone listening is, let's say, a new follower of Jesus. You've just within the last 6 months or to a year, you've decided to follow Jesus. If you don't hear anything else, hear this: you will never arrive on this side of eternity. I mean, we none of us arrive, and I think sometimes we think we should be better than we are.
Yeah.
And in some cases we should be, but we're not going to be perfect on this side of eternity. So that's not a license to sin, but that's a license that's we need to be real about it.
Mm-hmm.
So like you just said, there's new layers, new learnings. You take a pass. It's kind of like you put multiple coats of paint on something, right? You put the first coat of paint up, and it's
better.
Like it looks better than it did before, but it's not done yet.
Right.
And then you put another coat of paint on, the same color paint on the same wall,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's going to make it a little better. And some walls and some types of paint, you need 3-4 coats of paint or more. So we're
We're
arrive.
redecorating at the Cropp house, so that's
Okay.
hitting a little too close to home. The
sorry.
number of coats of paint
too
we're having
real
to put
here,
on
huh?
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good, and I think that's an encouragement too, for a number of reasons. One, we're not going to arrive, so we shouldn't beat ourselves up when we fail. God will move us forward, and He's going to retest us, and we just need to pick ourselves up and keep moving forward in faith. But also, I think just the fact that God tests, God wants us to succeed. It's not we tested you, you failed, and you're out. There's retesting, and there's moving forward. Even in you watch sort of a downward spiral in the book of Judges of you go from Deborah all the way down to Samson, just in the Judges we looked at on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
There is you can watch a degradation of character in those judges. Now, these arguably are the best that God can find in Israel at the time to be the judge. And just the character keeps going south over the course of that time. And this is the best we can find. So, but God keeps testing and God keeps trying. Eventually we end up with the kings and David, and we kind of start getting leadership that can bring people as a nation, the character back up. But, God is not leaving them alone. He's staying in the game. He's continually trying to call them forward to repentance and to growth and to faith. And that's really encouraging to me that God's not going to leave me alone. He's not going to, as I'm trying to walk with Him, He's not going to well, sorry. Too many chances you're out. That God wants me to succeed.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most encouraging things when we see that. We see how squirrely people are. And it's easy for us, on one hand, to look at what God's people did in the Old Testament and think, why'd they do that? Well, we have all of we sit on this side of history with all of the knowledge and the background that we have, and we know how it played out. They were right there in the middle of the story, just like we're in the middle of our own story. But to see that God used sinners, He used people who were not perfect, people who didn't have it all together, but the common theme is that those that God really used for His purposes and plans, they had a heart for Him, and they were willing to obey. Even though they failed, then they cleaned up if they messed up, but they were willing to obey. And we kind of what we got to at the end of the time on Sunday was the United Kingdom. So we saw those 3 different kings. And the interesting thing about that, if you haven't read the part in 1 Samuel with this conversation between sort of God and Samuel, the people come back and they say, we figured it out. We know what went wrong. We don't have a king. We want to be just like everybody else. And if God's people say that, you're heading into trouble. But God wanted to be their king.
You're right.
And the people wanted a king. I thought that would fix it. So God gave them what they wanted. And the first one that they got, though, he didn't have a heart for God.
Yeah.
And then the next king was not perfect by any means, but he did have a heart for God. And you see the lasting effect of that, and that's why God gave the promise to David that his throne would be established forever. Again, pointing towards Jesus. And And then God, he the kingdom transferred into his son. So what David saw was the kingdom intact, and then it fell apart from there. So that part of what kind of heart do you have for God? That's really key. If you have a whole heart to follow God, then God can use you, even if you're a broken person with a whole heart, because all we have available on this planet are broken people.
That's all we got. That's all I am. Well, that gets us to this coming Sunday.
Yes.
Where we're at the divided kingdom on to the end of the Old Testament. What kind of preview can we get for what's coming up on Sunday?
Yeah, I think the part that we're going to enter into with this, particularly the divided kingdom, can be one of the more confusing parts in the Old Testament, because what we don't understand is that there's two kingdoms going on. So you constantly are hearing about, so and so in the third year of the reign of so and so, and so one, I hope that this will help clear up some of that confusion. People will have a better understanding of how that part of the story is fitting together. So when they read it, they'll see and they can identify, oh yeah, okay, this is what's happening here. And we're going to see, that ultimately people don't follow the kings. And God's going to send prophets, and people aren't going to listen to the prophets, and God's going to bring judgment. And again, everything's pointing towards the King of Kings, who will come, that we read about in the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
But so we're going to wrap up the storyline of the Old Testament on Sunday.
Very, very cool. Well, I invite you who are listening and watching to join us for church on Sunday, whether that is at our Beach Street location at 1750 Beach Street in Fort Worth, Texas, or it's online at hopechurch.com. I encourage you to join with us as we continue in the story of the Old Testament, and invite somebody to join with you. It's not uncommon, particularly in difficult days, which certainly the past couple of years have been, that it starts to raise questions in people's minds about what's solid and what can I really rest my whole life on. And the Bible is the best answer for that. And what God's ways are the best answer for that. And so if you know of people who are asking questions, invite them to this series. This, I think, will be a real encouragement to them as they're trying to find answers for life. So look forward to worshiping with you on Sunday, and we look forward to seeing you back here next week for the next Sunday Extra podcast.